every single one of our major customers and minor customers all shut their doors overnight.
You need the right people in the right place at the right time. And sometimes you have the right people in the right place, but at the wrong time.
I've got to keep going forward. I've got to keep looking for revenue streams. I've got to keep looking for growth, keep looking at new ways of doing things.
But, what's the culture like at the business? What do we stand for, the values?
I've got to tick that box on my personal development program I don't really want to be here.
Scaling up a business isn't easy. If it were, we wouldn't have less than 4% of businesses scaling beyond 10 employees or around £1 million turnover level, and less than 1% beyond 50 employees. But the contribution that we make as owner-managers to our economies is immense and should never be underestimated, yet it can be a tough gig for all of us at times. And only other business owners truly understand the challenges that we face. And through ScaleUp Radio, we aim to help make things a little easier. We interview guests who have been where you are now and may have faced some of the challenges that you are facing. And they offer their thoughts and advice on what has worked for them, as well as what didn't. And we've also combined many of the lessons from these interviews and also through working with hundreds of owner managers over the last 10 years or so into a practical scale-up handbook that we've called the Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System, or ESUS. And it's for owner managers like you and me as we navigate our own scale-up journey. And you can order a copy through your favourite online book retailer or by going to all the W's, esusgroup.co.uk, www.esusgroup.co.uk. On this week's episode of ScaleUp Radio, I talk with Rob Stone. And Rob has actually been on ScaleUp Radio with me before, talking about the formation and the growth of Instaloft, which is now in its 8th year. And there's a link to Rob's previous appearance in the show notes. But we invited Rob back onto the podcast because he's just been awarded Entrepreneur of the Year 2022 at the UK Business Awards. And we wanted to hear a bit more about what led up to the award and how his business has grown even further since we last spoke with him. And as you'll hear, Rob is now overseeing something that's more almost a business empire, with other businesses being formed or acquired to join the Instaloft group. And we covered a lot of subjects during our conversation, including things like looking where you're spending the money, and are you leaving money on the table that you might be able to bring it into the business, perhaps by creating or acquiring a new department or a new arm of the company. We also talk about finding the positive in the negative. And for Rob, it was an accident that led to him having to make sure that the business could survive without him being on the tools, and that inquiries could be taken by someone other than him as well. And when you're figuring out your pricing, we also talk about doing your research and seeing what the average is in your industry, but don't undersell you or your knowledge or experience. And as you'll hear, Rob had a pretty rare start with his pricing. And Rob's a fascinating business owner, no doubt about it, with an incredible story that surely will help to inspire and motivate us all on our scale-up journeys. Welcome to another episode of ScaleUp Radio. I'm here with Rob Stone. Rob, welcome. Great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me again.
Good. My pleasure. And Rob is Entrepreneur of the Year 2022. He's an investor. He's also founder and CEO of 4 companies: Instaloft, GarageFlex, InstaSpark, and Loft Zone. So great to have you on, Rob, and really excited to hear about some of your journey and some of your lessons.
Thank you.
Good. So where do we start? Give us a feel for all of those companies then, and the scale maybe of your empire. It looks like a bit of an empire that you've built there.
We're aiming for that, certainly. Where do we start? Yeah, it's a good question. Instaloft, as you may be aware, is on its 8th year now. Actually, at the end of this month, it will be its 8th year. And we have gone from being me, just working from my driveway, up into, I think we've got around 126 employees and 26 sales staff. We've got GarageFlex, which has been going for 17 years, but we acquired that in January. And that does sort of garage storage, very similar to Instaloft. And that has probably only around 10 or 11 employees. InstaSpark is a new venture we started again in January. That's got, again, 10 or 11 employees.
Yeah.
Grown quite nicely in its first year. And then we've got Loftzone, which should be going now for around 10 to 12 years. And again, that pretty much runs itself. It's got a great team in there. And again, a very small setup in terms of the number of people, with about 8 people.
Okay. So what got you into the idea of having several different companies then? So we'll go back in the beginning, probably explore the Instaloft journey, because I think that's the main journey that you've been on, isn't it? But what
Yes.
got you into acquiring and starting these other companies as well?
Oh, it's quite convoluted in a lot of ways. So with InstaSpark, I always knew that we were paying subcontractors to do electrical work for us. We're offering customers lights and sockets in their loft spaces. And people were saying to us, oh, can you do a mains board upgrade, or can you do this, that, and the other? And of course, all that work got passed on to our subcontractors because we didn't get involved in those sort of things. And over time, we saw these subcontractors, growing fairly substantial operations off the back of the work we were giving them. Mm-hmm. And I became aware that that's almost giving business away. So we set up InstaSpark really for that purpose. We had our own electricians anyway. They were doing just lights, so they were almost wasted. And we just thought, you know what, we'll bring it in-house and we'll do it all ourselves. And that led to then saying, well, actually, we'll set up InstaSpark for the purpose of running alongside Instaloft, doing all of the light and subcontract work. So Instaloft now subcontracts to InstaSpark, but then we take on extra work and we do some commercial stuff, more domestic stuff. We get repeat business, which we don't get at Instaloft because once you've done a loft, that's the end of it.
Yeah. Okay.
And it really came from that, the opportunity to, pay ourselves rather than paying another company.
Yeah, so you looked at really where you were leaving money on the table,
yes, exactly,
and thought, okay, we could do that and have some of that as well. Okay, brilliant. Yeah. And so you mentioned obviously that these have spun out a little bit from the Instaloft side of things. So
yes, yeah.
Just tell us what Instaloft does. I think we can sort of guess from the name, but tell us what Instaloft does.
Yeah, Instaloft provides loft storage solutions. So that's things like loft boarding, loft ladders, loft hatches, insulation, roof windows where needed. And we do it across the country now from 8 different depots, doing around 900 installs a month. Yeah,
so pretty significant size. And you said there that a moment ago that's very much a one-off install side of things and not a recurring revenue model or anything.
Yes, yeah. We do get customers that move house and they come back to us, or they have half a loft done and they come back to us and have the other half done, but it's a few and far between.
And what do you think separates you or Instaloft from other competitors that are out there?
You're going back a long time now, 8 years when I first started out, and I looked at an industry that I thought, it's got a lot of, half decent companies, a lot of one-man bands and things like that. And we wanted to show that we were just as professional. We could do the job better. I discovered the Loftzone flooring system, and that raises the floor. It protects the insulation from being squashed, and it's the only BBA approved loft flooring system. So initially, we just started talking about that. We started talking about, protecting insulation, especially you can imagine at times like now where energy prices are going up through the roof. So it's become more and more relevant today than it was even sort of in the last sort of 8 years. So our system protects that insulation, which most other systems don't. Okay. And that's been the cornerstone. It's been what we've pushed. That, along with the fact that we're a family business, a number of the family work within the business, and we push our reviews as well. We're probably one of the leading companies for getting reviews. We're very strong on that because social proof is important. People want to know that other people have used this company and had a great experience, and we push that quite heavily both on social media and on Google and places like that as well.
And if there's one thing that you attribute to your rapid growth, I mean, as you say, you've gone from literally doing an install yourself to having 900 being done in a month, which is in a period of 8 years, and 126 employees, which is phenomenal growth. Is there one thing that you'd attribute that to?
I'd love to say me. But in the real world, obviously I founded the company and gave the ethos to it, but it's the people that we bring in, the people that come in and they're committed to it. It becomes a way of life, and they sing dance and spread the joy of Instaloft, in all walks of life. Without a doubt, the people here have become, if they're not family, they've become family.
Yeah.
And it's what they espouse day in, day out that makes the difference.
Okay, well, we'll dig into that a little bit more, because I think that there's been quite a lot of people listening thinking, crikey, how on earth did you manage that? I've got some great people too, and there's great people. Absolutely, I totally agree with you. They are the foundation of everything, and then they're really going to drive things forward. But sometimes there's got to be something that we've got right about the business model and about other things as well. Otherwise, there's however good the people are, it's going to be a struggle. So let's go right back to the beginning. What got you into this? What made you think, I'm going to start up a business that's helping people get the best out of the use of their loft space?
Okay. To do that, I've got to go back a little bit further as well.
Okay.
I spent quite a long time of my life in financial services and got made redundant not long after the credit crunch happened, as many people did in that industry. Mm-hmm. And a young girl knocked my door offering me free loft installation. And this was a time when I was out of work, my wife was pregnant, and it seemed like an opportunity just to get into somewhere making some money, knocking doors, giving away free installation under what was called CERT and CESP. So I started doing that, got involved.
What was that called? Sorry, I missed what that was called.
So CERT and CESP. So it was government installation grant schemes.
Okay.
So we were basically saying to people, you can have the grant to get your installation done in your lofts. And I was in that industry for quite a long time. Came out of that, that sort of ended around 2012 sort of time and became quite a difficult, the funding rules changed and the company changed. So I found myself sort of, pretty much back out of work. I set up a company to do a similar sort of role. And while I won't go into details, it didn't work out. I ended up owing a lot of money through these schemes. And it got to a point where I had nothing left. I remember sitting on my living room floor, crying my eyes out, not knowing which way to turn. I was playing with all sorts of ideas. I wasn't one to not be working, to not be doing something. And I came across an advert for a franchise actually, offering loft ladders and things like that. And I thought, well, I spent the last couple of years of my life doing loft installation, and one of the objections we had a lot of people was that they didn't want to have their loft insulated because they lose their storage. And I thought, well, this ties in really well. If we can figure out some way of doing this. So I went searching for, how can you use a loft and still have your insulation? And I came across the Loft Zone store floor system, and I just put two together and thought, so the biggest objection that we had for loft insulation can be overcome by using a raised floor system that protects your insulation. Right. So I played with a few ideas and didn't know whether anyone would be interested, but I set up a Facebook page. I used some of Loft Zone's images to start marketing it, and really just went from there. It was an idea based on a couple of different experiences and a problem that, or an objection that we found quite a lot, and realised I could overcome that objection and give the best of both worlds.
So you were literally, you found the storage, the floor system, and you were literally buying that in job by job, or did you set up some kind of arrangement with the company first, or how did you do that?
Yeah, so that was an interesting one. I remember I called them up and I got a customer that wanted the work done, and I called Loft Zone up and said, I'd like to buy some stock from you. And they were like, yes, no problem at all. I said, but the problem is I've got no money.
So you were literally, down on your knees, literally, yeah. Yeah.
I actually took out a £200 bad debt credit card to give myself enough money to buy a few basic hand tools. Right. I'm talking a screwdriver and a handsaw, not a jigsaw or anything like that that we use these days. Right. Just to give me a chance to get going. And it was a strange thing because I remember Loft Zone sort of saying, "Oh, thank you very much for your call."
Right.
But I sort of begged and pleaded, and eventually they agreed to give me enough to do the one job. And I said to them, "Look, send me that through, and I promise I'll pay you as soon as the job's done, as soon as the customer pays me." And lo and behold, the customer paid me, and I paid them. And it went on like this for probably about 3 months, where I'd have enough for one small job. I was only doing, maybe 1 to 2 jobs a week, sometimes 3. So it wasn't in terms of their cash, I guess it wasn't a massive amount. But to me, it was the difference that made the difference. They helped me out in those early days by agreeing to do that. I'm sure they don't know why they agreed to it, but they did. And I went from there to I say about 3 months later when they phoned me up and said, look, you've been doing this for us for quite a while. We think we trust you. So we'd like to offer you a pallet full of stock so that we don't have to keep sending you out stock every day.
Okay.
And a pallet was probably at the time about £1,100 worth of stock. So that got delivered onto my driveway, much to the frustration of all my neighbours, I'm sure. And we just went from there. So
you didn't have a loft or a garage to store it in then?
No, nothing. No, I did have a garage actually, and I was stored. They have some components to the loft zone which come in cardboard boxes, so we kept that in the garage as much as we could. All right.
So you were
it was more me, but
yeah. So you were literally finding these jobs through an ad in the local papers and things.
No, it was all on Facebook. So I couldn't afford to advertise anything. So I was going on Facebook groups, the local buy, sell, swap groups, local community groups, and just put in a basic advert up saying that, this is what we do. Have a look at my Facebook page. Here's some samples of some of the jobs. This is what you can gain from it. Let me know if you're interested. So I was doing that in probably, I worked out about an hour and a half radius from Telford. So anywhere from Wrexham over to Birmingham, Coventry, Leicester, all that kind of place, wherever somebody wanted me to go, really.
Yeah. And how did you teach yourself how to install the system?
YouTube videos. Also have a basic tutorial on how to install it, and most products have instructions with them. A lot of it was trial and error, going to a house and they'd ask me to fit a loft ladder I'd never fitted before, and it would take me probably 4 hours to do a 45-minute job initially, just reading the instructions while I'm doing it, and getting the customers on side and just explaining, look, I've never fitted one of these ones before, so if you can bear with me, it might take me a bit longer than normal, but I promise I'll be out your hair by the end of the day, that kind of thing. And I was often there in truth till about 10 o'clock at night, whereas the guys now that are trained properly on the installation, it might take them, like I said, 45 minutes to an hour to do the same job. So it was a lot of trial and error. I wasn't a DIY person at all, but I had a house to run, kids to feed, bills to pay, and that gave me the drive to make sure that whether I was there from 7 in the morning till 7 at night was irrelevant. I got the job done, I got paid, and suddenly was able to start paying my way again.
So how did you set your prices?
That was a more difficult one. I was never a believer in doing things cheaply, but also was well aware that there's a lot of consumer talk about people being ripped off, so I didn't want to be a ridiculous price either. So I looked at a lot of other companies, probably took about 10 different companies, got a hold of their prices. Some of them were published. Sometimes I had to make a phone call to ask the question as if I was a client, and almost took an average and then went for the higher average in terms of the cost. And that worked for things like the loft hatches, the ladders, insulation, things like that, the flooring, because we were fairly unique. There weren't many installers at the time doing it. I spoke to some of the other installers that had been doing it for a while, and really sort of took their guide on what they were charging, what I wanted to make, and based it on that. And I think at the time we were considerably cheaper now, because a pack of loft boards, for example, used to be £3.50, and now they're £18 or something silly if you're buying from the same sort of places. So the price change in materials over the years has dramatically altered. But in those days, it was relatively cheap. Yeah.
And one of the challenges of those early stages, or things that sometimes we can get wrong, is when we're just on our own, and all we've got to do, I say all, is pay ourselves a little bit to pay our own bills. Yes. We may not set the pricing at a level that allows us to potentially then take on somebody else that we might have to pay to do part or all of the job. So was that something for you, or did you get that right from the start?
I did get it right from the start. I used a spreadsheet to calculate the jobs, and so the first jobs I was doing, you can imagine I would put them in the spreadsheet, and I was making what seemed like at the time an awful lot of money on a job, and that was a big help. But I also knew that one day I might want to pay someone else to do it, and I had to work out what that was going to cost me. Yeah. And that spreadsheet I put a column on it or a row on it that said, one man extra wage, 2 man extra wage, things like that. So I could sort of work out from that, well, if I take someone on, how much can I afford to pay them? And I played around with different amounts on a day rate basis. In actual fact, although I never did day rate in the end. But that's how I did it. Was
so
just a basic costing spreadsheet.
Brilliant. So right from the start, though, you built that in as a factor into the pricing with the view that you almost certainly would want to be able to take somebody else on as the next step.
Yeah, and I think because a lot of people don't, they set up, as you said there, to pay their own way, and they don't necessarily think about the future and what might happen, and they don't grow the business because they just can't afford in their current prices set up to pay somebody to do the work for them.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so you were doing these jobs. You started to get Loft Zone to trust you enough to send you a pallet of the equipment, of the materials.
Yep.
What happened next? What was the next sort of stage? How long did you carry on doing, for example, doing the jobs on your own? Yeah,
so I got in touch with a previous colleague, and he came along and started helping me on some of the bigger jobs, and occasionally my kids, like Jordan, who is now one of our operations manager. He was 13 or 14 at the time. He was coming with me during school holidays and weekends to help me out. So there's quite a few pictures of us in our younger days, looking slimmer and healthier, doing these sort of things. But I would suggest there's quite a pivotal moment where this significantly changed.
Right.
And I was at someone's house one day, doing a quote and sort of trying to describe to them what their loft hatch was going to look like when we were moving it. I think 180 degrees or something, turning the angle around. So I was describing that, and as I was talking to him, I was looking up at his loft hatch, stepped backwards and fell down his stairs. Yeah, it was quite painful. It was probably 6 or 7 months in from the start of the business, really, maybe a little bit longer. Fell down the stairs and I sprained both of my wrists, which put me in a bit of a predicament because suddenly I had customers that I got booked in, and 2 hands that I couldn't use because they were in these plastic splints.
Yeah.
So that was a bit awkward then. And I remember I put a post on Facebook saying, is there anyone out there that can do this kind of work? I've got an assistant that knows what he's doing, but I need someone to drive him around because he didn't drive. And lo and behold, somebody tagged a friend that was actually indirectly part of the family. It was my sister-in-law's brother. So she tagged him and he said he would give it a go, come and have a try. But he wanted some sort of reassurances. He was very skeptical. I think he'd worked for a few people that hadn't paid him and things like this. So we agreed, or I agreed, under a bit of a cloud of uncertainty, to take him on as an employee.
Okay.
So he told me what he'd worked for, which I think at the time was like £80 a day. And he soon changed his mind on that, sadly. But he agreed to come on board for that at the time, which he did. We took him on full time. And that, as I say, was a turning point for me because suddenly I had, Scotty, which is the lad's name, and Gareth going out doing these installs, and I wasn't doing them. I was, my days were freed up, if that's the right way to describe it. And my one hand recovered fairly quickly, which meant I could drive again. So I left them doing the installs, and I carried on learning to do more marketing, going out and doing more quotes and things like that. So I remember one of the comments from Scotty was, well, you can't afford to take me on and actually pay me for a week's work because you've never had a week's work. And I sort of reassured him that would never be a problem. And as it turned out, from that day to this, he never had a quiet week. He was working every single day, Monday to Friday, without any problems at all.
So up until that point then, you were handling all the inquiries yourself, were you, as well as being up in the loft?
Yes. Yeah. So I was responsible for answering the phones, doing the accounts, if that was the way to describe them in those days. The inquiries, the emails, anything you name it, invoicing, trying to take payments off people, things like that. I had a card machine that was given to me by the bank that I used to use. I used to take it with me and get payment once the job was complete and things like that. So it just made things very efficient. But like anything, time moves on and suddenly you find that you're missing calls because you're in a quote and you couldn't answer your phone, and trying to call people back is often a challenge. I think people pick up the phone to find a supplier that they're looking for, and if they don't answer, they move on to the next one. And I found that was happening quite a lot. And again, it was a recommendation of somebody to think about getting somebody suggested I get an admin person, and I did that temporarily. I got a friend answering a few calls for me, but it didn't really work the way we wanted it to. So I ended up using a call answering service who would answer the phone as if they were me. that evolved on from them just answering the phone and passing on messages to them actually booking appointments for me. I gave them access to a Google Diary, and they were booking my appointments for me and, you know, allowing me not to even speak to the customer at that point. You know, my first contact was, hello, you know, my name's Rob from Instaloft. I'm on my way to see you. I'll be there in 45 minutes, you know.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. So you almost by dint of that accident of falling down the stairs, you kind of ensured then that the business wasn't reliant on you. It forced you to make sure that the business wasn't reliant on you from the installation point of view, but also you realised that there might be some business that was going missing by not answering all the calls, and you put that call mining in place, which now then by the sounds of it, you've now got the foundations for being able to scale because you've got a profitable business model that's not totally reliant on you. You've freed up your time to go out and do some of the things that are going to add the most value to the business in terms of maybe finding more clients, but also planning the next stage of the business. And you've also outsourced and delegated some of the admin side of the initial part of the business.
Yes. Yeah. And I will say that at the time, none of this was a conscious effort. It was more quirks and circumstances and things like that led to these things. But it became, you know, something that almost formed the backbone of the business as it grew, because it became something. So our first salesperson was probably, I think, 18 months down the line from when I first started. And we, at that point, felt like we were making quite a lot of money and doing quite well, and we wanted to get an orangery on our house. So we phoned a company up to come and do an orangery. And so this chap turned up and he was chatting to me about, you know, what he does, how much he sells, and these sort of things. Probably not the normal sort of thing. It was almost like he was being interviewed, and that wasn't really the intention at the time. I started chatting to him about the fact that I wouldn't mind getting a salesperson to work for me, because, you know, I was spending all my day, you know, doing quotes and then coming back and doing all the paperwork and sending invoices and taking payments and doing marketing. So long days. And so I sort of rudimentarily in my head put a few ideas together for him just during a meeting. He was selling me an orangery, bear in mind, so it was quite a strange pitch. It was a bit on the fly. And he said to me, well, you know what, if you come up with some figures for me and email me, you know, I'll give you my email address and I'll have a look at it. So he went off and, you know, gave us that quote, and I rapidly sort of sat down and started crunching a few numbers. At the time, I didn't know much about numbers, so it was just you know, what can I afford to pay somebody to make it worth their while and mine. I did that and sent him an email and heard nothing back for probably 2 or 3 weeks, and just carried on doing what I was doing. He called me back maybe beginning of January time that year, and just said, look, I've had to think about your offer, and it sounds like it could be quite interesting. You know, it's not what I would normally expect to be going out selling, but I'll give it a go. So he came out with me for a couple of weeks, just learning what I was doing during the quotes, and you know, there began another new story, because he started doing all the sales, which suddenly meant I could run the business during the day. I wasn't leaving the office so much, or the office was probably my house at the time. And really that was the first moment for me where I thought, this really makes a difference. If I get other people to do the things that are taking up my time, you know, or that I'm not particularly good at in some cases, then suddenly I'm free to do other parts of the business, which then help contribute more to the growth, because you've got somebody doing the sales, you know, they're getting fully booked up, you're doing more marketing, you're answering more questions on Facebook, for example, or have more time to start thinking about how you can do referral schemes. You know, the things that you don't think about when you're so busy just doing the job.
Yeah, and so that was about 18 months in. You were saying. So what sort of size was the business at that point? And
I'd say we had 2 vans on the road. You know, and they were doing okay. You know, they were going out doing these things. There are a couple of turning points along that period as well, where at one point, with the 2 vans, cash was becoming a bit tight. We were trying to put on the 3rd van, and we just weren't making any money out of it.
Right.
And somebody, I forget who it was now, said to me, well, one way of doing it is to stop doing discounts.
Okay. I
thought, that's an interesting idea. Because we used to do a thing where we'd say, it's 15% off if you go ahead while I come out and do the quote, you know.
All right.
And it panicked me a little bit, but sure enough, at this point, I was back out doing quotes as well because we were getting that busy again. And we just said, okay, we'll stop doing discounts and see what happens. Maybe we'll do it every other day. But we went out on the first day where we decided we weren't doing any, and it didn't make a difference. People were still buying off us. They'd seen our reviews, they'd seen that we were, a decent company. And suddenly we almost added 15% onto the bottom line.
So the price wasn't the key factor.
No, exactly. So that was a very valuable lesson to get us to that point. But we had 2 vans on the road. We were looking to increase to a third. We tried it. It failed miserably. I'd saved up by this point £30,000 in the bank, which seemed like a fortune at the time. Mm-hmm. And by the end of the quarter, after we put on the third van, it was all gone on wages and materials and things like that. So I didn't really understand what I'd done wrong there.
So this is after you'd stopped the discounting? Yes. So even with that, but with the third van, something was going wrong?
Yeah. Okay. And I think, in hindsight, it could have been that I was taking a bit too much out myself. It could have been a number of different factors. But what I did is I joined like a business coaching group and went and sat with them, and they started talking about different things. And these things were P&Ls and balance sheets and stuff I'd never even looked at and didn't understand. But and in fact, at one point when they were talking about it, I would fall asleep because it was just like, this just doesn't interest me at all. And I think one guy said to me, "Look, if you figure this out and get your figures right and create a business that's repeatable in terms of the figures don't vary all the time, you'll get some sort of stability and you'll be able to predict, and build a predictable model to grow with." So he sat down with me one day and just said, "Well, what are these costs? What are these costs? If you do this, this, and this, it should balance out." So I think we increased prices a very small amount, and it was a minimal amount. Yep. But we suddenly had better sight of what the costs were and why this van was costing me money, and how soon we were getting payments in and all these sorts of things. So we literally sat back and not reworked the entire business, because the foundations of business were already there. But we suddenly started doing like a cash flow forecast, for example, so I knew what bills were coming out. So some bills I'd pay them early because they were a bill, and didn't think about, if I pay them when they're due in a month's time, I'll actually have some cash for the rest of the month, So just silly little things like that suddenly made a difference and left money in the bank that didn't need to be spent at the time, which meant that we could start investing in more things, because that would then pay dividends later on, usually fairly quickly. Yeah, very good. So three vans, and then there's you and probably a couple of other people. So you probably were around about sort of five team size, about 5 then at that point, or are there more than one person in the van? We built up very quickly to 5 teams. So we had the 2. We put the third van on. We took it off because it wasn't working, as I said. Once we redressed all this, we put the third van back on. I remember the people in the mastermind group saying to me, don't do it, including my wife. She was adamant that we shouldn't do it as well. We were doing okay. We were making a fairly, not a wage we were making. But I forged ahead. I put the third van on using the new sort of, predictive modeling we were doing. And it worked. So then once we got busy, I created a formula saying, well, once 2 vans are booked up for 3 weeks, we'll put a 4th van on. A third van on. And when the third vans are booked up for 4 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, we'll put a 4th van on. And we literally modelled the whole thing from that day to this by, if customers are waiting more than 4 weeks, then it's probably time to put a new van on. So if you've got 4 vans, and they're booked up for 5 weeks, that 5th week is another van for that whole month as well.
What a great metric. So that's van, and presumably by van, you mean van plus a trained person to go and actually install.
Yeah.
So what were the key constraints? You just talked about the fact that the financials were a bit of a constraint there. You got control over those, and it sounds like the main thing there was around making sure that you kept the cash in the business as long as possible. So that so you got that positive cash flow essentially. What were some of the other challenges to make that work? What about finding the people and training the people? Or
we've had some colourful characters over the years, as you can imagine. And in truth, I took people on, gave them a chance, showed them what to do, because I always figured that if I could do it with no background in this, then potentially anyone can.
Yeah.
That hasn't always turned out to be true, unfortunately.
Right.
We've taken on some interesting characters on that basis, and we had people working for us, and they were difficult personalities, and it got to the point where I was spending as much time dealing with these difficult characters as I was trying to just deal with the day to day, and that led me to a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. So I decided to put an installations manager in.
Okay.
So one of the guys that was a particularly good fitter, I said to him, do you fancy doing this? It's a bit more money. You'll control the day-to-day of the guys, so you'll meet them in the mornings instead of me. You'll get them set up on the vans and make sure they do the jobs properly, and assist if they need any help.
Yeah.
So we did that. That took me away sheltered me a little bit from the more difficult personalities, and we were quite ruthless in those days as well. We wouldn't stand for any messing. If somebody was letting us down on a repeated basis or walking off a job halfway through because they stubbed their toe, the day before during the weekend or something like that. We just said we're not going to mess around with people, and that meant that we went through a few frogs, but we found a few princes.
Okay, so how many vans, how many people then were you at? What stage were you at there before you took on the manager?
We got the 5 vans before I did that.
5 vans, okay. Yeah.
It was that point really that things started to progress quite quickly.
Yeah.
So I had a phone call from Loft Zone, who was our supplier obviously at the time, asking me, they've got a customer that was inquiring in the area of Reading, down in Berkshire, and asked me if I would be able to cover it, or find some way to be able to do the odd job down there, because they hadn't got anyone covering that area at the time.
Yeah, so what's that, 3 hours away?
Yeah, good 2 to 3 hours depending on traffic. Yeah. So I started looking at the area and thinking, I wonder if we can cover that from here, and if we did, we'd have to put people in hotels, and we've got enough work up here, so we don't really need to do that, but maybe we can start employing people down there.
Okay.
So we looked at the area, looked at the geography, and said, well, if we set up a depot down there, we could probably do it. And of course, I've got a clue how to do anything like this. This was a whole new thing. I remember we organised the premises, started taking on advertising for salespeople, advertising for some fitters on Indeed, and we signed up for this unit, and the unit fell down. The solicitors were just to and fro in all the time about whether this was acceptable, that was acceptable, right. Wanted this piece of paper, that piece of paper. So we got salespeople on, they were out there doing some selling, and again, mainly from the buy, sell, swap groups. They were racking up the customers ready for installations. The install teams that we'd taken on were being trained, and we had nowhere to work from. So we were in a bit of a nightmare situation where we had sort of like 4 days left before these jobs were supposed to be starting work, and nowhere to work from. So we actually rented some containers, shipping containers. Yeah. And we ended up stocking these shipping containers up, and we actually ran that depot for 3 years out of those shipping containers.
Where did you put the shipping containers?
In a field in Reading. So it was a farmer that had a bit of land where he had a handful of containers that he rented out. So we started off with 1 or 2, and ended up with 5 in the end.
Right. And are these mainly for storage for the?
Yeah, just for storing materials in. So anything from boards to ladders and screws and all the bits and bobs you can think of over time.
Right.
And the guys, so we started off from there. It was a very cheap way of opening a depot, because suddenly you haven't got, these £20,000-30,000 premises you have to pay deposits on. We didn't have any of that. We had, containers that were £100 a week, if that, being paid for as and when the bills came in. And it was fantastic. We always use that as a cornerstone for our growth afterwards. We learned an awful lot in terms of, the process needed to when to start a salesperson, when to start the fitters, when to start organising premises and things like that, all from that one, rather sketchy episode where none of us knew what we were doing and we winged it.
Right. So, okay. So from Telford, you built up the business, and it sort of evolves, but now you've had to go into a different area. You've started thinking, okay, well, exactly what are the steps that we need then to make this almost as a separate site, a separate area work efficiently? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So did that allow you then to build a model as to how you could then take that to another area.
It did. And in fact, a model that meant that we were in profit in that area within the space of 4 or 5 weeks.
Wow.
So we take on a salesperson. That's where the initial cost came in, because we would put them in a hotel perhaps and pay for their food while they're staying up in Telford. They go out with Richard, who is one of our salespeople, as I said, and they spend 2 weeks with him. Once if we take the salesperson on, they're paid commission only, so there was no cost to us in paying that person apart from providing a hotel for them to stay in, which is like a courtesy. Once they start their training, we start advertising as well, so that by the time they're ready to go and start selling, we've got leads ready for them. So that's the biggest initial cost. Once they hit the road, so on the Monday, for example, they're out selling. We then start training installers. So they were getting 2 weeks training then, and we would train them usually on site if we could help it, but initially in Telford. So they come up here, they'd have the training in Telford with our existing fitters. So they go out. So within 4 weeks, they're generating income, almost from scratch.
Brilliant. And you've already got the model then as to when you take on the second ban and all of those things already sorted.
Yeah. But again, that was trial and error. We take on one van and realised pretty quickly that a decent salesperson is selling 2 or 3 of his clients a day. So we were building work up, in rapid succession. So now whenever we do it, we try and start a depot with 2 to 3 vans just to make sure that we've got either more staff than needed because they're slow when they first start, so it takes them a bit longer. So extra hands make light work. But also to save customers having to wait a long period of time. If you've got a customer saying they want the work done, you don't want to leave them waiting weeks on end while we try and find new staff.
So now you must be thinking, crikey, we've now just gone somewhere at arm's length into another area. You must have been thinking, oh, well, where next? We've got a model that we could go around the country with.
We did, yes, yeah. So going back into Telford, as I said before, at one point I was doing the quotes alongside Richard, and I put an advert up for another salesperson, and my daughter decided that she was going to, or said she was interested. And at the time I was like, you're a girl, how can you go and sell this? People expect men to go into the thing. And that was a really silly thing for me to think, because she was amazing,
Right.
I gave her a go because why wouldn't you? And she got out there and she sold probably as well, if not better than I did, which says a lot about my way of thinking about how people might react to it. She could be completely wrong or completely inaccurate. And then she, her husband now, he was posted to Peterborough with the military, so she decided she was going to move, which suddenly meant she hadn't got a job, and we'd lost a salesperson. And I thought, well, we've done it in Reading, we could do it in Peterborough, we could open another depot there.
Okay.
So followed exactly the same process. We got a very small depot over there that was relatively cheap, and did follow the same process again. She was all there ready to go. So we started putting a few adverts up. She moved house. She started doing quotes. We got people, again, trained up to do the actual installs themselves. And we sent guys from Reading and from Telford over to go and train them live on the jobs. So again, almost from a standing start, we had a fully fledged depot that went up to 4 or 5 vans within probably 2 or 3 months.
Brilliant. So now you must be getting to the point where it's starting to become a little bit challenging to manage the complexity of the business. Now we've got 3 individual areas and depots running, lots of people, lots of kit coming in and out, lots of money, lots of bills, lots of invoicing. How did you manage to keep in control of everything?
It's always been as needed. So when things were consuming my life and I hadn't got time, other things were slipping that were probably equally as important. Again, a guy I've known for many, many years approached me and said, look, I've got a lot of experience in operations. Is it something I could talk to you about? He came down to see me, and he then came on board looking after the 3 depots from a central location. We had a couple of guys that we call them sort of almost like senior head fitters, so we were using them to go and buy stock and things like that. And I also took on a kind of a contracted basis, really, another gentleman that sort of seemed to be quite good at feeding me and egging me along and going out and talking to people in the field, getting them on board. And so his name was Alex. And he was again another interesting personality, really great. He really drove me to just keep trying and I was reading a lot of business books and he was reading the same books. So we sort of egged each other on quite a lot in those days to just make sure we got the right people in the right places. He went out. I remember he went down to Reading because we were getting a lot of grumbling off the staff about things. And one of their biggest issues was the amount of time it was taking them in the morning to go and get stock from local suppliers. So we started putting into place with Howard coming on board as an operations manager. We started tasking him with things like making sure that the stock was already in the depots so they didn't have to go looking for it in the mornings, and just little bits like that. As we see it was a lot of it was reactionary in hindsight.
Okay.
Because I think there's an old saying which you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So we were finding these things as we were going along, but because we were quite small and I'm gullible and quite easily convinced of things, but people would suggest things and we'd look at it on paper and say, well, yes, that in theory would make life a lot easier for these people or for me or for whoever was involved. And it was all about trying to keep it as simple as possible without drowning ourselves in work at the same time.
Yeah, brilliant. So now you're starting to build a reasonably significant business. At what point did you change from kind of going, oh, well, there's an opportunity because we've been asked or because your daughter's moving to Peterborough? They kind of evolved, if you like. They came to you, you reacted to them. At what point did you switch that around to going, let's plan the growth of this of this business?
Yeah, that was, I think Peterborough was another turning point there where I thought, well, we've done it in Reading, we've done it in Peterborough, we could just keep doing the same thing and targeted areas that we haven't hit. I had this idea in my head, we wanted to be the biggest in the country. So then we decided to open, I think Newport was the next depot. And it was just a case of let's just keep doing it. We'll get on a map. And I've got a map actually on my wall over there. You can't see it from here, obviously on the recording. But it's a big full scale wall map of the UK. And I started sort of getting a pin, drawing circles around different areas and working out what was an hour and a half drive time from these areas. And we started regionalising different spots based on partly on population, but also based on just being able to drive to them. As simple as that. So we earmarked a few spots. We said so we do Newport, South Wales, which can cover most of sort of Swansea and that area, and then all the way down across to Bath, which is almost the limit where the Reading depot could reach. And then we did the same thing with Yorkshire. Got that going. And again, we did the same thing with Essex. And Essex was the last depot we opened during that period. And we opened it probably 3 weeks before COVID hit. So that was an interesting time, as you can imagine. But we just kept doing that. So we tried to aim to do it sort of once every 3 to 4 months. So once the depot was established and it was running okay, that's when we'd then try to open the next one.
Excellent. And how's your changed over that time then?
It has, yeah. The whole period has been quite an interesting time of reflection because we've had me being heavily involved in the business, obviously for the first good 4 or 5 years, and other people then coming in and taking over bits. So a point where it became too much for me, or other things were slipping. As I say, we take some on then to do that part. So my role became one of being almost like a general dog's body to now I always refer to it as I just steer the ship.
Right.
So I try and make sure that the headwind's in the right direction, that the sails are unfurled, and that we're all going. We're all rowing if we need to.
Yeah.
And if somebody stopped rowing, it's usually me that has the privilege of being able to spot it because I'm not in the business as much now. So, I quite often will sit and think, and I'll spot something and say, why has no one noticed this? But it's because everyone's busy doing their general day-to-day focus. So I get to sort of see those little nuances and try and put plasters on them, or better still, find out what the root cause is and resolve those.
So you've changed certainly from not being so involved in the business, but now your role is not just the strategic side, but it sounds also like you're there to support and help other people to do what they need to do as well as possible. So you're providing everything that they need. So it's much more of a support role in a way that you're playing, as well as that strategic visionary piece.
Yeah, because I think it's important to support and mentor people and give them guidance, and listen to what their career path or their career predictions are going to be. What their aspirations are. I love the saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. And I love leading the horse to water and then watching it drink. So we've got countless staff that have come on board, and they've taken a role, and they've either adopted the role to them, but really flown with it, or they've come up with new ideas and new ways of doing things that we would never have thought of. So that the business throughout its entirety has been a collaborative effort. I'd like to say, like I said before, I'd love to say it was me that was the key person in it, but it's not. It's people being given the opportunity to do something, being given the belief from me that they can do it. And it's not always easy, as any business leader will know, to take something that you've done day in, day out for a long, long time and let somebody else do it without getting involved yourself. It's quite hard to step back, and I'm sure I could still, even now, step back and stay out of things that I shouldn't always get involved in. I think it's the nature of any business owner that's done it from scratch to do that to a degree.
And do you find that some of your original people are always coming to you with questions, or have you managed to insulate yourself from that a little bit?
I think it will depend on the nature. You can always get people that will come to me with a question that they don't like the answer to, that they've got off somebody else. You'll get some people that have an idea that they think I'm the only person that should listen to it, or that could even answer the question. But for the most part now, we've got quite a firm structure in place that everyone understands. So I always say to people, look, my door's always open. If you feel you want to come and speak to me, if there's something burning or you've got a question, then you can always message me or come in and see me in the office. But for the most part, we've got a structure which is, I'm here as the founder. Then we've got the operations managers. Then we've got the installation managers below them, the area managers. So there's a hierarchy we try and encourage wherever possible, because usually someone's got the answer, someone else has already done it or solved it, and it's just it quite often ends up as a training issue that we could sort out fairly quickly. But I always say to my guys, look, I'm here if there's a question or if there's something you want to talk about, and usually it'll be career aspirations and things like that people want to talk to me about, which is quite nice.
Great. Good. So you've built a business, hugely successful, really, really good. You've gone from basically being the little guy nibbling at the heels of other people to now you're the big guy and other people are nibbling at your heels, probably wanting a slice of your business quite a lot. And you've got a business where with the loft zone and with that particular floor system, that's a big part of what it is that that gives you that competitive advantage, I guess, or has done. So how have you protected that side of things?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I think it was around 2019 when I eventually managed to acquire the shares in Loft Zone, and that was quite an interesting one, because there's quite a few Loft Zone authorised installers. And as you can appreciate, they were very twitchy about what my intentions were. Was I going to take away their ability to install it? Was I going to cause them a problem and ruin their businesses? And I tried to make it clear really from the onset of that I wasn't interested in stopping other installers doing their own work, and not going to interfere. But I did say, so at the same time, I'm also going to keep growing Instaloft, and I'm going to be coming into the areas they're working in, and that they've just got to set themselves goals and do what we've done. So I've tried to help and advise and encourage other installers as well. We sometimes get some benefit from that. We have some installers that ring us up and say, thank God you've come in our area, because since you've done all the marketing, you've increased our business tenfold. Right. And that's quite nice that people understand that, we're going to come in and market a product that not everyone's going to use us, not everyone's going to choose our company to do it, but they're going to see the idea and they're going to go looking at other companies at the same time. So it's not been so much about protecting Instaloft itself, but in just growing the industry, making the product and service that we all offer more more well known, making it giving the exposure to it to the general public, and I think that's benefited not only Instaloft as well as what we deem now to be the market leader, but also numerous other installers, both loft zone installers and people that do other types of loft building.
Brilliant, good. Well, I think I've got loads more questions I could ask you because you've obviously, and also if nothing else on the acquisition of some of those other companies, I think we might have to leave that for another discussion. There's a few questions I always like to ask people towards the end of the discussion. Yeah. So, I mean, what's next? You've had a phenomenal first 8 years. If we were having this chat in 5 years' time, what does success look like for you then, Rob?
In 5 years' time, that's always a brilliant question. We actually have a meeting next week, a 2-day meeting where we're going to be discussing exactly that. The plan for the next 12 months. Obviously, we aim to open new depots now that the world's settled down again. We've opened 2 recently. They're fledgling depots at the moment, and then we're earmarking over the next few days the next stage in that the depots that we plan to open over the next 12 months. And also looking at opportunities to perhaps move abroad into Europe or into. I've got some interest in the States as well. Loft Zone already sell over there, so it's looking at if we're selling the manufactured items in the USA, then we can probably sell the service as well. Yeah. So that's quite exciting. We just got to decide whether we want to do it under a license basis or set up another company over there doing it as Instaloft. We've then got obviously the electric business is growing very rapidly, and the garage business as well as a new acquisition. So there's lots going on there to try and create a whole in-house service. We have some new things we're just trialing as of this week. We've taken on a couple of new members of staff. I'm not going to say too much about that.
Okay.
But my feeling is that added onto Instaloft currently will then grow to become another separate business as well. So continually looking at, as we said earlier on, where are we spending money that we could be doing, where we could be doing ourselves.
Yeah, very good.
So excited to explore all those sorts of opportunities.
Yeah, well, I look forward to asking about those in 5 years' time, if not before. Yes. So what about, you mentioned Facebook and the buy, sell, swap, sell sort of groups. Is that your main route for marketing, your lead generation? Do you still find that works for you?
No, we do. It's very mixed now. We do an awful lot on Facebook. We do a lot on Google AdWords, like I imagine most companies do. We also have quite a strong referral scheme in place as well. So we encourage our current customers to recommend us to their friends and family and, local neighbourhoods, especially on a new build estate, where we've got no way of getting into that place because it's a new area. So the people living there talking to each other can be very beneficial, as you can imagine. But we do an awful lot on social media. We're trying to grow that, on a monthly basis, trying to, there's one of the metrics, excuse me. One of the metrics we look at is what is our following now on Instagram? What is it on Facebook? How can we increase that? Because if people know you, they can buy from you. If people don't know you there, they're never going to buy from you. It doesn't matter how good your product and service is.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, brilliant. And what about finding people, finding staff? What works for you in that way?
That, as any business will tell you, over the last sort of 18 months. So this is COVID hit. That's been one of the biggest challenges. The labour market across the whole of the UK is challenging.
Yeah.
We try and talk about how we're a family-based business. You're not just a number. You're a valued person here, and we just try and take on people on that basis and show them that encouragement. It doesn't always work. It doesn't matter how good you are to some people. They always want more. People are always going to be challenging. There's lots of different personalities out there, both positive and negative. And I love the idea of taking a negative personality and turning it into a positive, showing them there's a new world out there if they're willing to take it.
Yeah.
But sometimes it doesn't matter how hard you try on that, you can't. So we talk about a good story. We talk about the story, the growth of the Instaloft family. When people come on, they're always welcome to the family, not to the business. And we try and keep that feeling going throughout the depots as well.
All right, brilliant. What are your key measures? Are there one or two key measures that you always look for, maybe in a depot, or what to keep your finger on the pulse?
Number of installations done based on value. So we look at how do I describe this eloquently? We know what value on average a 2-man job is and a 1-man job is. So each depot runs on the basis of two-man vans and a 1-man van. So the 1-man van does the smaller value jobs,
right?
That are easier to do. The 2 men where they need the support of 2 people to do a work. So they carry different values, so that the metrics quite heavily on those. That's quite important. So you've got a 5-day week. Have they got a fair spread of work? And of course, you can't put too much on people. Someone could do an awful lot of work in one day, but they couldn't do it every day.
Yep. Okay.
And the next one really is just on quality. Are we getting the jobs done right? Are we getting them done, on the day they're supposed to be done, so that we haven't got any upset? And that can be a challenge. New staff need longer, so you can't say to them, a job that might take 1 day might take them 2 initially.
Yeah.
So it's trying to make sure those balances are in place, and make sure the manager are treating staff right, make sure they do things like buy them a bacon butty on a Friday.
Brilliant.
Just to show that they value them. There's all sorts of mini metrics like that. What's going on here?
Very good.
All sorts of mini metrics like that, that we just try to encourage the guys on a daily basis to make sure they're mindful of being positive and showing that family feel.
Excellent. And couple of final things. What you mentioned books earlier on. You like reading business books. 1 or 2 business books that stand out for you?
Oh gosh, one of my favourites, and it's not everyone's taste, is the 10x Rule.
Okay.
By Grant Cardone, because that just encourages you to think bigger. The guy's a bit like Marmite. You can love him or hate him. But what I think is always important is that if you say to yourself, next year I want to do 100 grand in my business, that's great, but set your target at 500.
Right.
Because if you think bigger, if you aim to do bigger, you'll probably get a much lower figure, but setting those higher targets all the time make a big difference. That book has been, instrumental to me. I love listening to little excerpts in that for that very reason of just thinking bigger, don't think too small.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Any bits of software or apps that have changed your life from a business perspective?
Not really. Facebook has been
fair enough.
Golden for us, as you can imagine. The business pages. In terms of apps, no, we use a great CRM called Antil, which comes as a basic package, and you can build that up to you can build all your systems and processes into that, which has been instrumental in us helping us grow the business. We've just set that up with another company as well. So that's been instrumental. We do all of our business through one system now, which is great.
Excellent. Good. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, Rob, and I know our listeners will as well. It's packed full of really good lessons from your experience of scaling up. And I know we could have at least another couple of podcast episodes out of talking to you further.
I'm always happy to talk about things like this. It's one of my passions, as you probably appreciate. There's so many different ups and downs to creating, building and running a business that you can't ever cover it in one session anyway. So
brilliant. That's super. I mean, before we close, is there anything else that you'd like to say you feel you haven't covered that you'd like to?
No, the only thing I'll say is as I said earlier on, you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of people out there don't invest the time they need to learn those skills. And also is to take time for themselves as well, because we can all go a little bit crazy trying to work out these things, and sometimes you just need a break. You need to go and do something for yourself, not just for the business. Brilliant.
Great. And if people would like to get hold of you or the company, what's the best way for them to do that, Rob?
They can contact me on LinkedIn. I'm on there. Usually if you search up on Facebook or on LinkedIn, founder of Instaloft, I'll pop up on there. I'm happy to talk to anyone in any form they want to get hold of me on. Brilliant. You're a star. Rob, thank you very much indeed for sharing your experiences. Thank you. Don't forget to take a look at www.bizsmarts.co.uk to access a great range of resources to help you in your scale-up journey. So that's bizsmarts.co.uk, which is bizsmarts.co.uk. This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.